Gross domestic product, or GDP, is a number that countries use to measure their economic activity. For many years, China reported very high GDP growth numbers, suggesting a rapidly expanding economy. In 2024, the National Bureau of Statistics in China announced that the economy grew by around 5%. This figure met the government's pre-stated official target for the year. This number suggests continued strength and resilience in the face of global economic uncertainties. However, looking beyond these official pronouncements reveals a more complex and potentially troubling picture of China's economic health, demanding closer scrutiny from observers worldwide. Many independent analysts look at China's economy and arrive at very different conclusions. For instance, research groups like Rhodium Group estimated that China's actual GDP growth in 2024 was much lower, perhaps between 2.4% and 2.8%. This is a significant gap from the official figures. This discrepancy is not merely an academic debate, it has profound real-world implications. It affects how businesses make investment decisions, how other countries shape their trade policies with China, and how we understand the true well-being of the Chinese people. The difference between these numbers points to fundamental questions about data transparency. Why do these large differences exist between official statistics and independent analyses? One major reason is the severe slowdown in China's critically important property sector. This sector has been a major engine of growth for decades, but it is now facing a deep crisis. Additionally, local governments, which are responsible for a lot of investment, are facing their own financial difficulties. It appears that the true extent of these problems might not be fully reflected in the official data. Some economists even suggest that China's GDP figures may have been overstated by as much as 3 percentage points each year for the past few years. This situation highlights a problem sometimes called authority bias, where official statements are accepted without enough critical examination. If China's economy is indeed significantly smaller, or growing much more slowly than official numbers suggest, then policies based on those inflated numbers are likely to be flawed. Such miscalculations can lead to poor resource allocation, exacerbate existing economic imbalances, and ultimately fail to address the real challenges facing the country. Ultimately, it is the ordinary households and businesses that bear the cost of these misperceptions and misguided policies, making an accurate understanding crucial. If we accept China's official GDP growth figures at face value, such as the 5.2% reported for 2023 and the target of around 5% for 2024, the government's recent economic policy actions become quite puzzling. An economy growing at such a robust pace should not typically require aggressive and urgent intervention from policymakers. Healthy economies generally need less direct support. Yet the Chinese government has been implementing a series of significant stimulus measures. This apparent contradiction between reported strength and policy urgency raises serious questions about the underlying economic reality and the true state of domestic demand. Beijing has rolled out a number of strong policy actions. These include several cuts to key interest rates, which make borrowing cheaper to encourage spending and investment. More unusually, the government made a mid-year budget adjustment, a step not seen since the Asian financial crisis of the late 1990s, signaling significant unforeseen economic pressure. Furthermore, a massive 10 trillion yuan program was announced to refinance the mounting debt of local governments. The central bank also established new liquidity facilities to support the struggling stock market, and the official monetary policy stance was shifted to appropriately easing, a term not used since the global financial crisis. These types of interventions are typically reserved for economies facing considerable distress, not ones that are purportedly booming. When a country's central bank and finance ministry take such dramatic steps, it usually indicates that underlying economic conditions are far weaker than publicly acknowledged. The call from the Politburo in December 2024 for extraordinary measures to support the economy further underscores this sense of urgency. The discrepancy between the official narrative of steady growth and the deployment of crisis-level policy tools suggests that policymakers are grappling with challenges more severe than they openly admit, making their actions speak louder than their growth figures. Moreover, the nature of these stimulus measures often seems to focus on short-term fixes rather than addressing the deep-rooted structural imbalances that plague China's economy. Many of the policies implemented by leader Xi Jinping and his administration appear designed to prop up failing sectors or manage immediate debt crises without fundamentally altering the growth model. This approach risks delaying necessary adjustments and potentially entrenching the very problems that are hindering sustainable, balanced growth. Without reforms that tackle issues like overinvestment and weak household consumption, these policy actions may only provide temporary relief while allowing underlying pressures to build further, a pattern that has become unfortunately familiar. For many decades, investment has been the primary engine of China's remarkable economic expansion, contributing a very large share to its annual GDP growth. This strategy involved massive spending on infrastructure, factories, and real estate. However, this investment-led growth model is now showing clear signs of strain and is facing severe challenges. The returns on new investment are diminishing, and much of this spending is no longer translating into productive capacity or sustainable economic activity. This shift marks a critical juncture for the Chinese economy, as the old drivers of growth are faltering significantly, demanding a new approach to development. In 2024, the performance of investment was particularly concerning. Independent analysts, such as those at Rhodium Group, estimated that overall investment growth was likely flat at best, or may have even declined during the year. The property sector, a colossal component of past investment, continued its steep descent. Official figures showed new property starts plummeting by 23% through November 2024, and completions were down by a staggering 26.2%. Even more telling, private sector fixed asset investment, a key indicator of business confidence and dynamism, fell even according to official data, signaling deep pessimism among private entrepreneurs. Local government investment, especially in infrastructure projects like roads, bridges, and railways, also experienced a significant slowdown. While official statistics for infrastructure-related fixed asset investment showed growth of 4.2% through November 2024, this was a notable deceleration from the 5.9% recorded the previous year. More concerning are other physical indicators, such as cement output, which fell by 10.1% year-to-date in 2024. Declining asphalt plant utilization rates and a severe drop in diesel demand also suggest that infrastructure growth was much weaker than even the official fixed asset investment data indicated, painting a grim picture. This situation starkly illustrates the economic principle of diminishing returns from investment. When capital is poured into projects that are not economically viable, such as a surplus of empty apartment buildings or underutilized high-speed rail lines, it does not generate genuine wealth or sustainable growth. Instead, such investment can become a burden, leading to rising debt and a misallocation of scarce resources. Rhodium Group estimated that investment likely acted as a drag on GDP growth in 2024, subtracting between 0.2 and 0.4 percentage points. This signals that the old model of simply building more is no longer working for China. Household consumption is a vital component of any healthy and balanced modern economy. It represents the spending by ordinary people on goods and services, and in most developed countries it is the largest contributor to GDP. For China to achieve a more sustainable growth path, increasing the share of household consumption in its economy is absolutely essential. Historically, however, consumption in China has been a relatively low percentage of its GDP. This is due to a growth model that systematically suppressed household income and favored investment and exports, creating significant imbalances that persist today. Looking at 2024, the data on household consumption presents a confusing picture. The National Bureau of Statistics household survey data indicated that real per capita household expenditure expanded by over 5%. Based on this, Rhodium Group estimated that household consumption contributed between 1.3 and 1.6 percentage points to GDP growth. However, this seemingly positive official narrative contrasts sharply with a range of other, more tangible indicators. For example, retail sales growth was only about half the rate seen in 2023, suggesting a significant slowdown in actual shopping activity by consumers across the country. Furthermore, consumer confidence surveys consistently showed sentiment at rock-bottom levels throughout 2024. When people feel insecure about their jobs or their financial future, they tend to save more and spend less. Adding to this picture of weak demand, consumer price inflation was near zero, with CPI increasing only 0.2% year-on-year in November 2024. Core price growth, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, was only marginally higher at 0.3%. Even e-commerce sales, once a vibrant growth area, showed signs of weakness, with major platforms like Jingdong and Alibaba's Taobao Tmall reportedly experiencing contracting sales of around 3%. The reasons for this persistent weakness in household consumption are manifold and deeply rooted. The ongoing crisis in the real estate sector has had a significant negative wealth effect, as property often represents the largest share of household assets in China. When property values fall or stagnate, people feel poorer and are less inclined to spend. Coupled with this are fragile labor market conditions, with concerns about job security and wage growth weighing heavily on consumer sentiment. This widespread uncertainty naturally encourages precautionary savings, further dampening consumption and making it difficult for domestic demand to become a primary engine of economic growth. Section 5. The state's purse. Government spending in a strained economy. Government consumption, which includes spending on public services, administration, and the day-to-day operations of the state, is another component that contributes to a country's gross domestic product. It's important to distinguish this from government investment in infrastructure, which falls under the investment category of GDP. While government consumption is typically less volatile than investment or net exports, its trends can still provide insights into the fiscal health and policy priorities of the state, especially during periods of economic uncertainty or transition. It reflects the direct contribution of government activities to economic output. In 2024, government consumption in China provided very little impetus to overall economic growth. Independent estimates suggest that its growth was probably weakly positive, contributing only around 0.2 percentage points to the headline GDP figure. Monthly government expenditure data available through October 2024 painted a picture of meager overall spending growth. Total spending across both central and local governments was up by just about 1% year-to-date. This indicates a cautious approach from the state, likely constrained by various fiscal pressures that limit its ability to significantly boost economic activity through direct consumption. A particularly significant drag came from local government fund expenditure, which contracted for the fourth consecutive year. Local governments in China play a crucial role in public spending, but many are now grappling with severe debt burdens and declining revenues, especially from land sales, which have historically been a major income source. While a stimulus package was announced in November 2024, its primary focus was on refinancing existing local government debt at lower interest rates. While this measure is necessary for managing debt sustainability, it will have a limited immediate impact on actual government consumption in 2024, as it doesn't inject new spending into the economy. The broader context here is the significant fiscal weakness at the local government level, which severely constrains the state's ability to stimulate the economy. Measures like Circular 35, issued in October 2023, though still unpublished, designated certain provinces as risky due to their high debt levels. This led to a noticeable decline in borrowing among their local government financing vehicles, or LGFVs, which are off-budget entities used to fund infrastructure and other projects. Consequently, total social financing, a broad measure of credit in the economy, saw its growth hit new lows at 7.8% year-on-year, reflecting the tightening financial conditions faced by these crucial public entities. Section 6. Exports as a lifeline, the double-edged sword of trade surpluses. Net exports, calculated as the total value of a country's exports minus the total value of its imports, represent another key component of gross domestic product. For China, particularly in its earlier decades of rapid industrialization, a strong export sector was a cornerstone of its economic strategy, allowing it to earn foreign currency and create jobs. Even now, the performance of net exports can significantly influence China's overall growth figures, especially when domestic demand components like consumption and investment are showing signs of weakness or stagnation, making trade a critical variable in the economic equation. In 2024, net exports provided a surprisingly strong boost to China's economy. According to estimates from Rhodium Group, net exports were on track to make their third largest positive contribution to China's growth this century. This contribution was potentially as high as adding 1.2 percentage points to the GDP growth rate. Official data showed that exports rose by a robust 6.7% in value terms year-to-date through November 2024. Interestingly, falling export prices, often a symptom of industrial overcapacity and intense competition, meant that real exports, measured in quantity, were even stronger. Export quantity growth reached an impressive 11.6% year-on-year in November 2024. However, a large trade surplus often tells two stories. While strong export growth is one part of the equation, the other critical part is import performance. In 2024, China's imports were notably weak, reflecting the subdued state of domestic demand within the country. Imports were up only 2.4% in value terms year-on-year through November 2024. When a country's businesses and consumers are not spending robustly, their demand for imported goods and services naturally declines. Therefore, China's large trade surplus in 2024 was as much a sign of internal economic weakness as it was of external export strength, a crucial distinction. This reliance on net exports as a primary growth driver carries significant risks and implications. The falling export prices that helped boost export volumes are often indicative of overcapacity in China's manufacturing sector. This means Chinese factories are producing more goods than can be absorbed either domestically or by global markets at stable prices. This can lead to increased trade tensions with other countries, who may accuse China of dumping excess production and harming their own industries. Relying on external demand to compensate for insufficient domestic demand is not a sustainable long-term strategy and can make the economy vulnerable to global economic shifts and protectionist policies. Section 7. Headwinds and Hurdles: China's Persistent Economic Challenges. The challenges facing the Chinese economy today are not merely cyclical downturns that will resolve themselves with a modest uptick in global demand. Instead, China is grappling with a series of deep-seated structural problems that have been accumulating for years. These issues require more than just short-term stimulus measures. They demand fundamental reforms to the country's economic model. Without addressing these underlying imbalances, China risks a prolonged period of slow growth, financial instability, and increasing social discontent. Recognizing the structural nature of these headwinds is the first step towards formulating effective long-term solutions. One of the most pressing issues is the pervasive deflationary pressure. For the past 2 years, China has fallen short of its nominal GDP growth targets, which include inflation. In 2023, nominal growth was 4.6% against a 6.9% target, and 2024 saw a similar gap. Some economists associated with the China Finance 40 Forum have argued that actual Consumer Price Index (CPI) growth over the past 3 years was closer to -2%, a stark contrast to official figures and a clear sign of deflation. Factory gate prices have also been falling, which, while making exports cheaper, squeezes corporate profits, discourages investment, and puts downward pressure on wages. The property crisis remains a festering wound at the heart of the economy, with no easy resolution in sight. This crisis is deeply intertwined with the massive and often opaque debt burdens of local governments, which relied heavily on land sales to property developers for revenue. The announcement of a 10 trillion yuan bond issuance program to swap for local government debt over the next 5 years, starting in September 2024, underscores the sheer scale of this problem. Furthermore, unemployment, particularly among young people, which stood at a reported 16% in December 2024, remains a significant concern, dampening consumer confidence and social stability. Compounding these issues is the persistent problem of overinvestment, especially in the manufacturing sector. While this strategy has helped China become the world's factory and fueled its export machine, it has also led to widespread industrial overcapacity. This excess capacity not only contributes to domestic deflationary pressures, but also makes China's trading relationships increasingly fraught as it seeks to export its surplus production. This is not a sustainable path to balanced growth. Rather, it exports China's internal demand deficiencies to the rest of the world, inevitably leading to friction and potential retaliation from trading partners. Section 8. Gazing into 2025. A forecast fraught with uncertainty. As we look ahead to 2025, the economic outlook for China is shrouded in considerable uncertainty, despite official pronouncements that are likely to project continued stability and growth. The government is expected to maintain an ambitious GDP growth target, perhaps around 5%, consistent with its long-term objectives. However, independent analysts offer more cautious perspectives. For instance, Rhodium Group projects that China's GDP growth could reach between 3% and 4.5% in 2025. This modest improvement would be contingent on significant domestic demand stimulation and potentially more debt accumulation, representing a cyclical upturn rather than a robust, long-term recovery. Investment is anticipated to show some signs of stabilization or a return to modest positive growth in 2025, potentially contributing between 0.5 to 1.0 percentage points to GDP. Construction activity is expected to level off, partly because new housing starts are now below some estimates of long-term equilibrium demand. Furthermore, local government infrastructure investment might see an improvement due to more aggressive fiscal deficit spending and a reported expansion of special treasury bond issuance. However, a significant shadow hangs over private investment, which is likely to remain weak due to ongoing credit constraints, persistent deflationary pressures, and overall low business confidence. Boosting household consumption was a prominent message from the December 2024 Central Economic Work Conference, signaling Beijing's awareness of this critical weakness. Policy support is expected to focus mainly on expanding trade-in subsidy programs for consumer durables such as automobiles and household appliances. Rhodium Group projects household consumption growth to be between 3.5% and 4.5%, contributing 1.5 to 2.0 percentage points to GDP. Nevertheless, the negative wealth effects stemming from the protracted real estate crisis and the fragility of labor market conditions will continue to depress consumer confidence, limiting the effectiveness of these measures. Government consumption is expected to make a somewhat larger contribution to GDP growth in 2025, perhaps between 0.5 to 1.0 percentage points. This is based on promises of a stronger fiscal impulse from Beijing, reportedly including an expanded fiscal deficit target, potentially 4% of GDP, and a larger issuance of special treasury bonds, rumored to be around 3 trillion RMB. However, the fiscal system will remain constrained by weak revenue growth. Total tax revenue, for example, declined by 3.3% in the 12 months leading up to recent reports. The outlook for net exports is deeply uncertain, heavily dependent on potential U.S. tariffs and China's subsequent responses, making any significant positive contribution highly speculative. Section 9. The long road to balance, structural reforms or continued strain. It is becoming increasingly clear that the array of stimulus measures and policy tweaks currently being employed by Beijing are insufficient to address the fundamental structural challenges confronting the Chinese economy. For too long, Chinese leader Xi Jinping and his predecessors have adopted measures that provide temporary relief or manage immediate crises without confronting the deep-seated imbalances that hinder sustainable and equitable growth. These approaches often involve propping up inefficient state-owned enterprises or channeling more credit into already overbuilt sectors, thereby delaying the necessary, albeit painful adjustments required for long-term economic health. The most critical long-term challenge for China is to rebalance its economy away from an excessive reliance on investment and exports towards a model driven more by domestic household consumption. This is not a simple task and requires far more than just tinkering with subsidies for consumer goods or modest increases in government spending. Achieving such a rebalancing necessitates deep and comprehensive economic liberalization. This means creating an environment where resources are allocated more efficiently by market forces rather than by state directives, and where the benefits of growth flow more directly to the household sector, empowering ordinary citizens. True structural reform involves a range of difficult policy choices. It means significantly strengthening the social safety net, including pensions, healthcare, and unemployment benefits, so that households feel secure enough to reduce their high precautionary savings. It also requires comprehensive reform of the tax system to make it more progressive and to shift the tax burden away from consumption and labor towards capital and wealth. Improving corporate governance, particularly in state-owned enterprises, and ensuring a level playing field for private businesses are also crucial for fostering innovation and productivity, which are essential for higher quality growth. Ultimately, China stands at a crossroads. It can choose to embark on the challenging path of deep structural reforms, which will involve short-term pain, but offer the prospect of a more balanced, sustainable, and ultimately prosperous future. This path involves empowering households and allowing market mechanisms to play a decisive role. The alternative is to continue with the current model of state-led investment and export promotion, which will likely lead to diminishing returns, rising debt levels, continued deflationary pressures, and increasing social and international tensions. The journey to rebalancing is arduous, but persisting with the old imbalanced model risks a far more difficult future for China.